Domineering CEO's secret girlfriend turned out to be a bartender. And she's hiding a shocking past. In the heart of Haicheng, where tradition meets ambition, a quiet, brilliant distiller finds herself clashing with a domineering CEO, a man feared for his ruthless efficiency and impossible standards. When Lin Shuinong's prized liquor is dismissed as mediocre by the new boss, Zhou Hang, she refuses to back down. You should taste it before you judge. Then you'd better hope it's worth my time. But what starts as a battle of wills soon turns into something deeper. As Zhou Hang challenges Lin to create the perfect blend, she finds herself not only fighting for her craft, but for something she never expected: his respect, his trust, and maybe even his heart. But Lin has secrets that, if revealed, could shatter everything she's built. Will she rise to the challenge, or lose herself in the fire? Lin Shuinong, a fiercely independent distiller, has spent her life perfecting her craft, determined to carve out her own legacy. She believes in hard work, not fairy tales. But when the enigmatic and demanding CEO Zhou Hang takes over Jing Distillery, her carefully controlled world is thrown into chaos. He's cold, calculating, and impossible to please. She's stubborn, brilliant, and unwilling to yield. Their clashes are legendary, their tension undeniable. But when Zhou Hang uncovers an abandoned batch of liquor, one tied to his late father's unfinished vision, he entrusts Lin with a challenge no one else could handle. As they work side by side, their rivalry transforms into something neither of them can deny. But when the past resurfaces and secrets come to light, will their growing connection survive, or will it be drowned in betrayal? A love story wrapped in ambition, rivalry, and the intoxicating allure of the perfect blend. This isn't just about liquor. It's about passion, power, and a romance that defies expectations. Will Lin and Zhou create something unforgettable, or will they destroy each other in the process? What if the one who changed your life forever was the person you least expected? A powerful CEO who has everything except love. A woman fighting against fate, struggling to survive. Their worlds should never collide, but destiny has other plans. When power meets vulnerability, when a CEO falls for someone society deems unworthy, can love rewrite the rules of success and sacrifice? Or will ambition, secrets, and betrayal tear them apart? A past too haunting to forget, a secret too dangerous to reveal, a love too unstoppable to deny. If you believe in love beyond limits, don't forget, like this video to experience more captivating CEO love stories. Comment below, can love conquer ambition and power? Subscribe to CEO love stories and never miss the next thrilling romance. A story of unlikely beginnings. In the bustling city of Haicheng, where the aroma of aged liquor and fresh ocean air intermingle, Lin Shuinong was a woman with her life neatly mapped out, or so she thought. By day, she worked as a distiller, her hands skilled in the delicate art of crafting spirits, her focus unwavering as she tested ratios and adjusted temperatures to achieve just the right taste. By night, she returned to a modest apartment, a sanctuary shared only with her thoughts and the distant hum of the city. She found solace in the routine, in the predictable rhythm of her days. It was the kind of existence that kept her protected from the turbulence of emotions she had long ago decided were a waste of time. For years, Lin Shuinong had shielded herself from the entanglements of romance. Watching her father struggle with finances after her mother's departure had planted a seed of cynicism in her young heart. Love, she had concluded, was an expensive luxury she could not afford. Instead, she channeled her energy into perfecting her craft and repaying the mortgage on their small home, determined to ensure her father's twilight years would be lived in comfort. Yet for all her efforts, there was a quiet longing she dared not acknowledge, a sliver of her that wished for something more than the clinking of bottles and the measured pour of liquor. Her life was a well-oiled machine, predictable to the minute, until the day Zhou Hang arrived. The new general manager of the distillery swept in with the force of a gale, his reputation preceding him as both a business savant and a man whose temper was as sharp as his tailored suits. Zhou Hang had earned the nickname Enterprise Rejuvenation, a moniker that spoke to his uncanny ability to breathe life into failing companies. His arrival at the distillery signaled change, swift, unrelenting, and often uncomfortable. Employees whispered about his cold demeanor and the impossibly high standards he set. standards that no one seemed capable of meeting. To Lin Shuinong, Zhou Heng was an enigma. At their first encounter, she clashed with him. Her precious liquor, painstakingly crafted, was dismissed by him as trash. His blunt criticism hit a nerve, and she found herself speaking up in a way she never had before. "You should taste it before you judge," she had said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. It was a bold move, one that left her colleagues stunned. Zhou Heng, to her surprise, had taken her challenge in stride, his piercing gaze briefly flickering with something other than disdain. That brief moment of connection, if it could even be called that, marked the beginning of an unexpected chapter in Lin Shuinong's life. Where she had expected only professional friction, she found herself drawn into a series of encounters that defied her carefully constructed boundaries. Zhou Heng's presence, so commanding and yet so unsettlingly human, began to stir emotions she thought she had buried long ago. Each meeting, each heated exchange, revealed a complexity in him that she hadn't anticipated. A man who demanded excellence but who also carried burdens of his own. For his part, Zhou Heng found himself equally intrigued. Accustomed to employees who either cowered or flattered, he was caught off guard by Lin Shuinong's unflinching honesty. Her defiance was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that not everyone was willing to bend under the weight of his expectations. He started to notice the details about her, the quiet determination in her eyes, the way her hands moved with precision and care, the unassuming grace with which she handled her work. It was as if, in challenging him, she had become an anomaly in his otherwise meticulously ordered world. Neither of them realized it at the time, but their first meeting had set in motion a slow unraveling of their respective defenses. Lin Shuinong began to question her long-held beliefs about love and companionship. Zhou Heng, for all his confidence, started to see that vulnerability was not a weakness but a necessary ingredient for growth. Their journey, full of misunderstandings, sharp words, and unexpected kindnesses, was just beginning. Session 1. The new boss. Lin Shuinong, a talented distiller who worked tirelessly to support her family, was well known in her field for her dedication and craft. She had always taken pride in the distinct liquors she produced at the Jing distillery, where she poured her heart into every batch. The work was hard, the hours long, but she found comfort in the steady rhythm of her days and the predictability of her life. That all changed the day the company announced its new general manager, Zhou Heng. The news arrived as a storm cloud over an otherwise calm sky. Zhou Heng had a reputation that preceded him, a man known for sweeping through companies, implementing radical changes, and turning struggling enterprises into profitable powerhouses. His nickname, Enterprise Rejuvenation, was spoken both with respect and trepidation. He was celebrated for his results, but equally feared for his methods. The first time Lin saw Zhou Heng in person was during the company's annual team-building retreat, a gathering that had previously been a modest affair. This year, under Zhou's leadership, it had been moved to a luxury venue far removed from the usual budget-friendly locations. Employees buzzed about the generous upgrade, speculating about their new boss's character. Some called him a visionary. Others whispered about his no-nonsense approach. When Zhou Heng entered the room, the murmurs stopped. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. His sharp features and cool demeanor hinted at someone who had seen more than his share of boardroom battles. As he scanned the room, his gaze was steady, but not warm. There was no grand speech, no attempt to ingratiate himself with the staff. Instead, he simply nodded in acknowledgement before taking a seat at the head of the table. Lin couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension. Zhou Heng was a stark contrast to her previous managers. Where they had been approachable, he was distant. Where they had been collaborative, he seemed solitary. It was as if he operated in a world of his own, detached from the camaraderie that Lin cherished in her work environment. As the retreat progressed, it became clear that Zhou Heng's presence would not be a passing storm. His directives were swift and decisive. He called for a complete review of all the company's products, including Lin's prized liquors. This demand set off a flurry of activity within the research and development team. The distillery had long prided itself on traditional methods and time-honored recipes, but now their work was under a microscope. Lin's first direct interaction with Zhou Heng was not a cordial meeting in his office. It was an abrupt exchange on the distillery floor. She had been summoned to deliver a sample of her latest batch. When she arrived, Joe Hang stood with a clipboard, a pen poised over paper as he reviewed each product's specifications. Without looking up, he said, "This is the latest batch?" "Yes," Lin replied, holding out the bottle. Joe Hang took it, studied the label, and then turned to one of his assistants. "Have the analytics team run a full sensory profile. I want the data by tomorrow." It wasn't what he said that irked Lin, it was how he said it. His tone held no trace of appreciation for the effort and artistry that had gone into creating that bottle. To him, it was just another line item, another variable to optimize. He handed the bottle back to his assistant without so much as a second glance at Lin. Feeling dismissed, Lin bit her tongue and returned to her station. But her colleagues saw the tension. Whispers spread about the encounter, each person adding their own embellishments. By the time the day was over, the entire distillery was abuzz with tales of how Joe Hang had reduced their best distiller to a mere delivery girl. Over the next few weeks, Joe Hang's presence grew heavier. He walked the halls with a sharp, calculating eye, taking notes, observing processes, and issuing directives that disrupted the long-standing routines of the staff. Employees who had grown accustomed to a steady pace suddenly found themselves under constant scrutiny. Productivity reports, quality metrics, and performance evaluations were all tightened under his watchful gaze. Despite her initial irritation, Lin found herself increasingly curious about her new boss. She began to notice the subtleties in his approach, the way he asked pointed questions that revealed a deep understanding of the business. The way he listened carefully even if his demeanor remained cool. There were glimpses of something more beneath the surface. Hints that perhaps his aloofness wasn't arrogance, but a relentless pursuit of excellence. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lin stayed behind to finish a batch of experimental liquor. She had spent weeks perfecting the recipe, and it was finally ready for tasting. As she was arranging the samples, Joe Hang unexpectedly appeared in the doorway. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, he stepped inside. "Working late?" he asked. His tone neutral. Lin nodded, just finishing up a project. He approached the table, eyeing the neat rows of bottles. "This is the experimental batch I heard about." "Yes," Lin said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Would you like to try it?" Joe Hang picked up a bottle, examining it carefully before pouring a small amount into a glass. He swirled the liquid, raised it to his nose, and then took a sip. Lin watched him closely, her heart pounding as she awaited his reaction. He set the glass down and nodded. Not bad. It was hardly a glowing review, but it was the first time he had offered any kind of acknowledgement. Lin felt a flicker of pride, tempered by her frustration at his lack of warmth. She decided then that she wouldn't be intimidated by Joe Hang. If he thought she was just another employee, he would soon learn otherwise. As the session ended, Lin found herself more determined than ever. She would not let this new boss unravel her work or her sense of purpose. If Joe Hang wanted excellence, she would give him excellence, but on her terms. This was just the beginning of their clash, and Lin Shuinong had no intention of backing down. Session 2, the unexpected confrontation. Weeks passed, and the Jing distillery was a whirlwind of activity. Under Joe Hang's meticulous leadership, every department was restructured, new policies, new deadlines, new expectations, all implemented with the sharp precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The once familiar rhythms of Lin Shuinong's workday had been disrupted. She found herself juggling twice the workload, often staying long after her colleagues had gone home, perfecting her recipes and ensuring her liquors met the newly raised standards. It was during one of these late nights that the confrontation happened. Lin was hunched over her workstation, carefully measuring ingredients for a new batch. The lab was silent except for the steady drip of liquid from the distillation apparatus. Her focus was unshakable as she recorded every measurement and adjustment in her notebook. The recipe was complex, calling for a delicate balance of rare herbs and spices. If she could perfect it, it might become one of the distillery's most celebrated products. As she reached for the next ingredient, a voice broke the silence. "You're still here." Startled, Lin turned to see Joe Hang standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit, instead, he was dressed casually, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, The change in his appearance made him seem less intimidating, but only slightly. His expression was as calm and unreadable as ever. "I could say the same about you," Lin replied, her voice steady. "Why are you here so late?" He stepped into the room, his hands in his pockets. "I often work late. It's when the noise of the day settles and I can actually think." Lin raised an eyebrow. "I suppose that's something we have in common." He approached the table, glancing at the setup in front of her. "What are you working on?" "An experimental blend," she answered, holding up a small glass vial of amber liquid. "I think it has potential, but I'm still fine-tuning the balance." Zhou Heng picked up the vial, turning it slowly in his hand. "It's impressive, the level of detail you put into your work. Most distillers would have settled for something good enough by now." Lin's heart skipped a beat. Was that a compliment? From Zhou Heng? "I don't settle," she said simply. He placed the vial back on the table, his gaze meeting hers. "Neither do I." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lab's dim lighting cast long shadows, and the soft hum of the distillation apparatus was the only sound. Lin felt a strange tension in the air, something unspoken hanging between them. She had spent so much time resenting his methods, his demeanor, his seemingly endless demands, yet now, standing just a few feet away, she couldn't help but notice the depth in his eyes, the subtle intensity that drove him to push everyone around him to be better. "Why are you really here, Mr. Zhou?" Lin asked, breaking the silence. "Call me Zhou Heng," he said, leaning casually against the table. "And I came to check on the progress of this project." Lin crossed her arms, her skepticism evident. "At this hour?" His lips quirked into a faint smile. "You're here at this hour. Why shouldn't I be?" She couldn't argue with that. Instead, she turned her attention back to the table, picking up her notebook and jotting down a few more notes. "The blend still needs work. I'm not satisfied with the aroma yet." Zhou Heng nodded thoughtfully. "Do you need more resources? Different ingredients?" "I have what I need," Lin said, her tone clipped. "I just need more time." "Time," Zhou repeated, "something we rarely have enough of." His words held a weight that Lin couldn't quite place. There was something almost personal in the way he said it, as if he wasn't just referring to the project. She glanced at him again, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to make her pause. "I'm used to working under pressure," Lin said carefully. "I'll get it done." "I'm sure you will," Zhou Heng replied, his voice steady once more. "But remember, perfection is a moving target. Don't let it consume you." Lin tilted her head, studying him. "Is that your way of telling me not to be too hard on myself?" "It's my way of telling you not to burn out," he said, meeting her gaze directly. For a moment, Lin didn't know how to respond. She had spent so much time building walls, keeping her distance from Zhou Heng and the disruption he represented. But now, those walls felt less solid. She saw not just the stern general manager, but a man who understood the pressures they all faced. A man who, despite his cold exterior, might actually care about the people around him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Zhou Heng gave a small nod. "I'll leave you to it." "Good night, Lin." "Good night," she replied, watching as he turned and walked out of the lab. She stood there for a moment, the vial of amber liquid still in her hand, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite untangle. As the door clicked shut behind him, Lin realized that tonight's encounter had changed something. She couldn't yet put it into words, but she knew that her perception of Zhou Heng, and perhaps of herself, would never be quite the same. Session 3. A new challenge emerges. The days following Zhou Heng's unexpected visit were anything but uneventful. Lin Shuinong, despite her lingering questions about his motives, pushed herself harder than ever. The experimental blend consumed most of her time. She could feel the pressure mounting, expectations from her team, from herself, and most of all, from him. Zhou Heng's words from that night played in her mind on repeat. "Perfection is a moving target. Don't let it consume you." At first, she had taken it as a gentle warning, a rare moment of concern from the otherwise distant manager. But as her hours stretched longer and her progress slowed, it felt more like a challenge. Was he telling her to ease up? Or was he hinting that he didn't think she had what it took? She clenched her jaw, pouring another carefully measured ingredient into the flask. There was no time to second-guess her work. She had to prove herself. By now, the rest of the distillery was buzzing with rumors. Joe Hang had started making the rounds more frequently, stopping by departments he'd previously overlooked, taking notes, and occasionally giving curt, sharp feedback that left everyone scrambling to improve. His reputation as the enterprise rejuvenator was well known, but living through it was another matter entirely. Teams were being reassigned, some employees quietly let go, and everyone left behind felt like they were walking on thin ice. Lynn was no exception. She'd overheard whispers that her department might be next in line for restructuring. Some even speculated that Joe Hang might replace her as lead distiller altogether, bringing in someone with a more impressive resume or international acclaim. It wasn't an unfounded fear. Joe Hang had already recruited top talent in other areas of the company. She tried to tune out the chatter, but it was difficult. The idea of losing her role, her chance to perfect her craft, was unbearable. Her father had always taught her that being a distiller wasn't just about making liquor. It was about pouring your heart and soul into something that people could share in celebration, in sorrow, in life's most intimate moments. Lynn wasn't just making drinks, she was making memories. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up. One of her colleagues, Yu Tang, poked her head in. "Lynn, there's a meeting in the main conference room. Joe Hang wants all department heads present." Lynn straightened, wiping her hands on a nearby cloth. "What's it about?" "Something about a new initiative." He didn't give details, just said it was mandatory. Lynn nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "I'll be there." Yu Tang hesitated for a moment. "Hey, don't stress too much. You've been working harder than anyone. Whatever he throws at us, we'll handle it." Lynn offered a small, tight-lipped smile. "Thanks, Ting. I'll see you at the meeting." As soon as Yu Ting left, Lynn's heart began to race. A new initiative could mean anything. A restructuring, a new product line, or even a full overhaul of the department. And if Joe Hang was involved, it would undoubtedly mean more changes, more challenges, more scrutiny. She took a deep breath and steeled herself. Whatever it was, she would face it head-on. The conference room was already packed by the time Lynn arrived. Department heads from marketing, production, logistics, and more were seated around the long table, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Joe Hang stood at the head of the table, a stack of documents in front of him. He waited in silence as everyone took their seats, his piercing gaze moving from one person to the next. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice even and steady. "As you know, our goal is not just to stabilize Jing Distillery, but to set a new standard for excellence in our industry. The days of settling for mediocrity are behind us." Lin swallowed hard. His words were clear. The old ways of doing things were no longer acceptable. "We've identified key areas where we need immediate improvement," Joe Hang continued. "One of those areas is our product innovation. Our current lineup is solid, but not groundbreaking. That changes today." He gestured to a projection screen behind him. A slide appeared, showing a sleek, modern design for a new product line. "This will be our flagship collection. Premium liquors that will redefine how consumers view Jing. But in order to achieve that, we need more than just great packaging. We need exceptional quality, consistency, and innovation." Lin felt a bead of sweat form on her temple. This was exactly the kind of pressure she had anticipated. But it didn't make it any easier to hear. Joe Hang's standards were impossibly high, and she would have to meet them or risk losing everything she'd worked for. "I'll be personally overseeing the development of these products," Joe Hang said. "Each department will have specific targets and deliverables. For the R&D team," his eyes locked onto Lin's, "this means developing a signature blend that embodies our vision. I don't want something good. I want something unforgettable." Lin's breath caught. Unforgettable. It was a word that carried weight. A word that didn't just imply quality but also implied uniqueness. Something no one else in the industry could replicate. Could she achieve that? Could she create something so remarkable that it would not only meet Joe Hang's expectations but exceed them? "Deadlines will be tight," Joe Hang continued. "You'll have all the resources you need. But I expect nothing less than excellence. I'll review progress personally at the end of each week. If you have concerns, bring them to me directly." With that, he concluded his presentation and opened the floor for questions. Several department heads asked about logistics, marketing strategies, and production timelines. Lin stayed quiet, her mind already racing with ideas for the signature blend. Her notebook was filled with sketches, notes, and potential recipes. She knew that the road ahead would be grueling, but she also knew that this was her chance to prove herself. Not just to Joe Heng but to the entire company. As the meeting adjourned, Lin gathered her materials and headed back to the lab. She had work to do, long hours of testing, refining, and perfecting the blend that would become Jingyi's new flagship product. And though the path ahead was daunting, Lin couldn't help but feel a spark of determination. Joe Heng's challenge was more than just a test of her skills. It was an opportunity to show the world what she was capable of. She wouldn't let it slip away. Session 4. A brewing storm. Lin Shuinong's days had taken on a singular rhythm, early mornings spent evaluating batches of liquor. Long afternoons refining the new blend, and late nights poring over notes. The once steady hum of her work was now punctuated by tense conversations, tight deadlines, and a growing sense that everyone was watching her. Joe Heng's shadow loomed over her every step. Her colleagues were no help. Some whispered that she'd been chosen to lead the flagship project because of favoritism. Or worse, because of her looks. The notion stung, but she refused to let it deter her. She had built her reputation on skill and dedication, not shallow judgments. If they doubted her, she'd simply prove them wrong, again and again, if necessary. But one challenge after another seemed to pile up. The experimental blend she'd been developing wasn't coming together as she'd hoped. Every adjustment, every substitution of ingredients, resulted in something that was good, but not exceptional. Good wasn't enough. She stood in her lab late one night, staring at the array of bottles on the counter. Each held a slightly different iteration of her formula, and all of them fell short. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Still at it? The voice startled her. She turned to see Joe Heng leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket slung over one arm, his tie loosened. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. If anything, he seemed to expect it. "I can't stop now," she said. "Not until it's right." He stepped inside, his presence instantly shifting the air in the room. "And when will it be right?" Lin crossed her arms. "When it's unforgettable. Isn't that what you asked for?" Joe raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Unforgettable isn't just about taste. It's about experience, emotion, something that resonates. "I know that," she replied sharply. "But getting there isn't easy. I've tried everything." "Have you?" He took a step closer, his tone still even. "Or are you just repeating the same steps, hoping for a different result?" The comment stung, mostly because he was right. Lin had fallen into a pattern, making small, incremental changes rather than taking the risk of a complete overhaul. She hated that he could see through her so easily. "I'll find a way," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You have the talent," Joe said, his eyes steady on hers. "But talent alone isn't enough. You need vision, conviction, you need to take risks." Lin wanted to retort, to tell him she didn't need his advice. But deep down, she knew he was pushing her because he believed she could do it. That didn't make it any less frustrating. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Why not just let me figure it out on my own?" Joe hesitated, and for a moment, his usually composed demeanor faltered. "Because I see potential in you," he said quietly, "and because I don't want to see that potential wasted." His words caught her off guard. She had expected criticism, even disdain, but not encouragement. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "I guess I'll just have to prove you right." Joe's mouth quirked into the faintest hint of a smile. "I'll be waiting." The next day, Lin approached her work with renewed determination. She began experimenting with bolder ideas, blending unconventional ingredients, and drawing on techniques she hadn't used in years. It was risky and time-consuming, but it was also exhilarating. Her team noticed the change. Where Lin had once been tense and guarded, she was now focused and driven. They followed her lead, trusting her judgment even when it meant long hours and scrapped batches. The atmosphere in the lab shifted, still intense, but no longer suffocating. Instead, it felt like they were on the brink of something extraordinary. But not everyone was pleased. Director Ma, a senior manager known for his traditionalist views, began voicing his concerns. He claimed that Lin's methods were too experimental, that they risked alienating their existing customer base. Lin listened politely, but she didn't back down. "We're not just making liquor," she told him during a particularly heated meeting. "We're creating an experience. If we stick to what's safe, We'll never stand out. This industry rewards innovation, and that's what I'm aiming for." Director Ma shook his head. "You're gambling with the company's reputation. I hope you're prepared to face the consequences if this fails." Lin didn't flinch. "If it fails, I'll take responsibility. But if it succeeds, it could change everything." Her bold stance didn't win over Director Ma, but it earned her respect from some of the younger staff. They began rallying behind her, offering their own ideas and suggestions. Lin's once solitary effort was now a collective mission, and the energy in the room was infectious. As the days went on, Lin's blend began to take shape. Each iteration came closer to the elusive, unforgettable quality Zhou Heng had demanded. She could feel it in the way her team responded, in the subtle nods of approval from Zhou himself when he stopped by unannounced. Still, doubts lingered. Lin knew that even the slightest misstep could undo weeks of progress. She worked tirelessly, often skipping meals and ignoring the ache in her back from standing too long. She told herself it was worth it, that she was on the verge of something remarkable. Then, one night, as she sampled her latest batch, she felt it. The blend was smooth yet complex, with layers of flavor that unfolded over time. It was bold without being overpowering, familiar yet entirely new. She took another sip, then another, her heart racing with excitement. This was it. This was the blend she'd been searching for. She called her team over, her voice trembling with anticipation. "Everyone, try this." They gathered around, each taking a glass. The room fell silent as they sipped, their expressions shifting from curiosity to amazement. "Lin," one of them said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is incredible." She looked at their faces, saw the genuine excitement in their eyes, and knew she wasn't imagining it. She had done it. She had created something unforgettable. The next day, Lin presented the blend to Zhou Heng. She watched as he sampled it, his expression carefully neutral. When he finally set the glass down, he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a hint of pride in his gaze. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is what I was waiting for." Lin's chest swelled with relief and satisfaction. She had met his challenge and exceeded it. But she knew this was only the beginning. With Zhou's approval, the real test would come at the launch event. Until then, she would keep refining, keep pushing, and keep striving for excellence. After all, the storm wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Session 5, the public debut. By the time Lin Shuinong's new blend was ready to unveil, word had already spread beyond the distillery walls. Rumors swirled throughout the company, and the industry, about the upcoming launch event. People whispered that Jing Distillery had finally cracked the code for a modern, game-changing liquor. Expectations were high, and Lin could feel the weight of those expectations pressing down on her shoulders as the date of the launch drew closer. The company's event team had spared no expense. The launch would take place in a grand venue in the heart of the city, complete with sweeping views of the skyline, ambient lighting that changed with the mood, and live performances to keep guests entertained. Influencers, journalists, and industry insiders would all be present. This wasn't just another product reveal, it was a statement. Zhou Heng's first major product launch as general manager had to be a triumph. As the star of the evening, Lin knew her blend would be the focal point. Everyone would taste it, dissect it, and form opinions within moments of the first sip. She could already see the headlines in her mind. Jingyi's bold comeback, or worse, disappointing debut falls flat. There would be no middle ground. The week before the event, Lin barely slept. She reviewed every detail of the production process, double-checked the supply of bottles, and ran multiple quality tests on the blend to ensure consistency. Her team worked around the clock, fueled by her determination and a shared sense of pride. They had poured their hearts into this project, and Lin wasn't about to let them, or herself, down. The night before the event, Zhou Heng summoned Lin to his office. She arrived to find him seated at his desk, studying the final event itinerary. "How are you holding up?" he asked, looking up from the document. "Honestly, I'm exhausted," Lin admitted, "but we're ready. Everything is in place." Zhou nodded, his expression calm but focused. "Good, because tomorrow isn't just about the product. It's about showing the industry that Jing isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Your blend is the centerpiece, but the entire company's reputation rides on this." Lin's stomach tightened at his words. She had always known what was at stake, but hearing it from Joe himself made it even more real. "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't let you down." Joe leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "It's not about letting me down, Lynn. It's about proving to yourself that you belong at the top of this industry. You've done the work, now own it." Lynn nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pressure and confidence. Joe's faith in her wasn't expressed with overt praise, it was implied in his expectations. He believed she could rise to the challenge, and she intended to prove him right. The day of the launch arrived, and Lynn stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer. She had chosen a sleek, professional look, simple, yet polished. This wasn't a fashion show, it was a statement of credibility. Her reflection showed tired eyes, but also determination. Today, she wasn't just a distiller. She was the creator of something groundbreaking. When she arrived at the venue, the atmosphere was electric. The entrance was lined with banners displaying the Jing logo and elegant imagery of her blend. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation as guests mingled, their anticipation palpable. Waitstaff carried trays of appetizers and glasses of sparkling water, while a string quartet played softly in the background. Joe was already there, standing near the stage, speaking with a group of executives. He caught Lynn's eye and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "It's showtime." As the event began, a company spokesperson welcomed the crowd and introduced the evening's agenda. Speeches were made, performances dazzled, and the anticipation for the product reveal grew. Lynn stood backstage, her heart pounding. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd, the occasional burst of laughter, the faint clink of glasses. It felt surreal. Finally, her moment arrived. The spokesperson announced the debut of Jingyi's new signature blend, and Lynn stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and hundreds of faces turned toward her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves. "As a distiller, my goal has always been to create something that resonates, not just on the palate, but in the memory. Tonight, I'm proud to introduce a blend that represents not only the craftsmanship of Jing Distillery, but also a bold step into the future." She explained the concept behind the blend, the innovation in its creation, and the meticulous care that had gone into every bottle. As she spoke, she noticed the audience leaning in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration. When she concluded her brief remarks, the room filled with applause. It wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. And then came the most nerve-wracking part, the tasting. Waitstaff began pouring glasses and distributing them to the attendees. Lynn stood near the edge of the stage, watching as the crowd took their first sips. The seconds that followed felt like hours. At first, there was silence. Then, gradually, the room filled with a low hum of voices. She saw smiles, nods, even a few wide-eyed looks of surprise. A well-known food and beverage critic raised his glass in a toast, while a prominent influencer quickly snapped a photo of the bottle to share with her millions of followers. It was happening. Joe stepped up beside her, holding a glass of the blend. He took a sip, his expression neutral. Then, after a moment, he turned to her and said, "It's unforgettable." Lynn's chest swelled with relief. She had done it. Her blend was more than a success, it was a hit. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lynn moved through the crowd, answering questions, receiving congratulations, and basking in the glow of her accomplishment. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment. The work, the stress, the sleepless nights, it had all been worth it. When the event finally wound down and the guests began to leave, Lynn found herself standing near the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She felt Joe's presence before she saw him. "Quite the night," he said, his voice calm and steady. "More than I could have hoped for," Lynn replied, her exhaustion now tinged with satisfaction. Joe turned to her, his green eyes softening ever so slightly. "You've proven that you're more than just talented. You have the vision and the conviction to set a new standard. This isn't just a win for Jane. It's a win for you." Lynn met his gaze, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Mr. Joe, for pushing me, for believing in me." He gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I don't believe in you, Lynn. I rely on you." The words caught her off guard. There was something deeply personal about them, something that hinted at a trust beyond professional respect. But before she could respond, Joe's expression shifted back to his usual composed demeanor. "Rest up," he said. "Tomorrow, we start planning the next step." Lynn nodded, watching as he walked away. For the first time, she felt not just capable, but unstoppable. The storm she had weathered had only made her stronger, and she was ready for whatever came next. Session 6. A Storm Brews Within. A week after the successful launch of Jing Distillery's new signature blend, Lin Shuinong found herself standing before Zhou Heng's office door. She adjusted her blouse, then raised her hand to knock. But before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung open. Zhou's secretary stood there, holding a folder. He gave Lin a brief nod and stepped aside. "Go on in," he said. "He's expecting you." Lin entered the office, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if it was the pressure of the project they were about to discuss or the way Zhou Heng's piercing gaze always seemed to unnerve her. He sat at his desk, a sleek black pen in hand, reviewing documents. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Lin," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Have a seat." She did as he said, placing her notebook and a few printed reports on the table in front of her. The tension in the room was palpable, but Lin couldn't quite pinpoint its source. Zhou was composed as always, his demeanor calm, his tone measured, yet something felt different, as though an undercurrent of unease rippled through the air. "I wanted to talk to you about the new distribution strategy," Zhou began. "Your idea to introduce the blend to boutique liquor stores in the city center, it's good. I've read through the proposal, and I think it has potential." Lin's eyes flicked to him. Uncertain, was that praise? Zhou Heng was not the type to compliment easily, but he seemed genuinely intrigued by her plan. "Thank you," she said, keeping her tone steady. "I think it's a way to position Jing as both innovative and accessible. People see us as traditional, but the new blend is something fresh. If we can place it in venues where customers expect to find unique, high-quality products, we'll reach a broader market." Zhou nodded, his pen tapping lightly against the desk. "I agree, but there's one concern: the timing." Lin frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "If we roll this out too quickly, we risk overextending the brand before the market has fully embraced the product. The launch was strong, but we need more data, sales figures, customer feedback, social media response, before we expand distribution." Lin hesitated. She had spent weeks refining the proposal, confident that it was the right next step. Hearing Zhou's hesitation made her question her approach. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. "I understand your point," she said carefully, "but waiting too long could also mean losing momentum. We've captured people's attention now. If we hold off, another brand might fill that space." Zhou studied her, his green eyes sharp and searching. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair point, but we need a balance. Let's start small, just a handful of high-profile locations, and monitor the response closely. If it works, we'll expand." "Agreed?" Relief washed over Lin. "Agreed." As they wrapped up their discussion, Zhou's demeanor shifted slightly. He seemed more relaxed, as though a small weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Lin noticed it in the way he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. She was about to gather her things when he spoke again. "You've come a long way," he said. His voice was quiet, almost reflective. "The blend, the launch, your ideas, they've shown everyone here what you're capable of. It's not easy to stand out in this industry, but you've done it." Lin's breath caught. She wasn't used to hearing such direct acknowledgement from him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." Zhou's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he stood. "Keep it up. We have a lot more to accomplish." Over the following days, Lin found herself working closely with Zhou more often than ever. Meetings stretched late into the evening, and she noticed a subtle change in his behavior. He was still demanding and focused, but there was a new layer of trust in their interactions. He listened to her suggestions more openly, even seeking her opinion on matters beyond her immediate responsibilities. At first, Lin told herself it was just professional respect. She had proven her worth, and he valued her input. But then there were moments that felt different. The way he'd pause after a joke, as if waiting for her reaction. The occasional glance that lingered just a bit too long. The way he seemed more at ease around her than he did with anyone else. Lynn tried to push those thoughts aside. Joe Hang was her boss, and she was determined to keep things strictly professional. But it wasn't easy, not when he was always around, challenging her ideas, pushing her to be better, and, without meaning to, making her question her own boundaries. One evening, as they were finalizing the details for the boutique distribution rollout, Lynn felt the tension rise to the surface. They had been working for hours, and the office was quiet. Most of the staff had already gone home, leaving the two of them alone. Joe stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, while Lynn reviewed the final pricing strategy. "This is solid," Joe said, his back to her. "If we can keep costs under control, this could set a new standard for Jane." "Glad you think so," Lynn replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's been a long process, but I think we've found the right balance." He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate how hard you've worked on this. It hasn't gone unnoticed." Lynn looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot coming from you." For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Lynn felt her heart beat faster, unsure if it was from the long hours or the way Joe was looking at her. She opened her mouth to say something, but he spoke first. "Get some rest," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We'll pick this up tomorrow." Lynn nodded, gathering her notes. As she walked out of the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted. She didn't know what it was, or if it was even real, but it lingered in her mind long after she left the building. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The boutique rollout began, and early feedback was promising. Customers raved about the blend's unique flavor profile, and social media buzzed with glowing reviews. Lynn should have felt nothing but pride, but instead she found herself distracted. Her interactions with Joe felt different now, charged with an energy she didn't fully understand. She tried to focus on the work, on the numbers, on the feedback from retailers. But every time she walked into Joe's office, every time their eyes met across a meeting table, she felt a pull she couldn't ignore. It was infuriating and exhilarating at the same time. Lynn told herself it was nothing, just her imagination, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She knew she was standing at the edge of something that could either elevate her career to new heights or unravel everything she had worked so hard to achieve. And that was a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Session 7. Crossing the line. Another long night was winding down at Jing Distillery's headquarters, the hum of office activity fading into silence. Most employees had already left for the evening, leaving Lin Shuinong at her desk in the nearly deserted R&D department. Papers were scattered around her. Her laptop glowed faintly in the dim light, and the aroma of unfinished coffee lingered in the air. She was reviewing the latest test batches of the new snow liquor, double-checking notes, comparing samples, and meticulously recording the smallest details in her spreadsheet. The launch event for this updated blend was fast approaching, and every detail had to be perfect. "Still here?" A familiar voice cut through the quiet. Lin looked up sharply to find Joe Hang standing in the doorway. He leaned casually against the frame, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, tie slightly loosened. His presence filled the room in a way that made it feel smaller, more intimate. "Still working," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "The last round of feedback had a few inconsistencies. I just want to make sure everything's ready before the event." Joe nodded, stepping inside. "That's good. I need to know that this launch will exceed expectations. You've put a lot into it." Lin returned her attention to the spreadsheet. She could feel his eyes on her, and it made her fingers tighten over the keyboard. The air between them seemed heavier lately, more charged. She wasn't sure if it was something he'd said, something he'd done, or just something that had been building up over the weeks of working together so closely. Whatever it was, it left her feeling off balance. "Have you eaten?" he asked, crossing the room to stand beside her desk. "I had some snacks earlier," she said without looking at him. "That's not dinner," Joe said, his tone disapproving. He set his jacket on a nearby chair and leaned down slightly to see what was on her screen. "This can wait. You need to take care of yourself first." Lin finally glanced at him, caught off guard by the unexpected concern. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "You're not fine. You're pushing yourself too hard." His voice softened. "Take a break. Go home. This will still be here in the morning." It was a simple suggestion, but coming from Joe, it felt oddly personal. Lynn stood up and began gathering her things. Not entirely sure why she was suddenly so eager to leave. "I'll get something on my way home," she said, avoiding his gaze as she shoved her notebook into her bag. "Good." Joe's eyes stayed on her. "Unreadable. I'll see you tomorrow." Lynn nodded, grateful for the excuse to retreat. As she walked out of the building, the cool night air hit her like a splash of water to the face. She took a deep breath and tried to shake off the strange tension that had been lingering since her conversation with Joe. The next morning, Lynn arrived at the office early. Her mind focused on the presentation she had prepared for the leadership team. It was a crucial moment, an opportunity to showcase the progress they'd made with the snow licker and ensure that the upcoming launch would be fully supported. As the meeting began, Lynn laid out her findings and strategies. Speaking clearly and confidently, she noticed Joe sitting at the head of the table, his expression neutral but his eyes attentive. When she finished her presentation, there was a brief silence before one of the senior managers spoke up. "This is impressive work, Lynn," he said. "You've addressed every concern we had and presented a clear path forward. I have no doubt the launch will be a success." Lynn smiled politely. "Thank you. I believe we're in a strong position now." Joe's voice was the next to break the silence. "I agree. Well done, Lynn." His praise was simple, but it carried weight. Lynn felt a strange mix of pride and unease. She had worked hard to earn his respect, but she couldn't ignore the way her heart seemed to jump at the sound of his voice. Later that day, Lynn found herself in Joe's office again. He had asked her to review some final details of the event logistics, and she was determined to keep things professional. But as they went over the materials, the conversation began to drift. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Joe asked suddenly, leaning back in his chair. Lynn blinked, surprised by the question. "At the team building event," she said cautiously. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You didn't hold back then, did you? I remember you weren't exactly thrilled with my management style." Lynn's cheeks flushed. "I didn't know who you were at the time." "I know." Joe's gaze softened. "That's what I liked about it. You didn't pretend. You said exactly what you thought." It was refreshing. Lynn didn't know how to respond. She stared down at the papers in front of her, feeling the weight of his words and the way his tone had shifted. "Lynn," Joe said, his voice quieter now, "I know we've kept things professional up to this point, but I think we both know there's something more here." Her head shot up, eyes wide. "Mr. Joe." "Joe Hang," he interrupted gently. "Just call me Joe Hang." She hesitated, her thoughts racing. This was the last thing she expected him to say. "I don't think." "Lynn," he said again, his voice steady. "I know the risks. I know this might complicate things, but I can't ignore how I feel about you." Lynn's breath caught. She had spent weeks pushing aside her own feelings, convincing herself that what she felt was just a fleeting crush, a passing distraction. But now, hearing him say it out loud, those carefully constructed walls began to crack. I need time to think," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe nodded, his expression calm but his eyes searching hers. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." Lynn stood, clutching her notebook to her chest. "I should go." He didn't stop her. He simply watched as she left his office, his face unreadable. As she walked down the hallway, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, her focus, her dedication to her work. But now, for the first time, she felt uncertain. Lynn paused at the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city skyline. Joe's words echoed in her mind, stirring emotions she had tried so hard to suppress. Maybe it was time to stop running from what she felt. Maybe it was time to face it head on. Session 8. Secrets in the Distillery. The dawn arrived with a soft golden hue that streamed through the distillery's tall windows, casting long, stretching shadows over the polished steel tanks and neatly labeled rows of casks. Lin Shuinong had arrived earlier than usual, hoping to sort through some newly delivered ingredients before anyone else got to them. It was a routine she enjoyed, the quiet hours before the rush of production began, when the entire distillery seemed to hum with anticipation rather than action. But this morning was different. As Lin moved through the rows of barrels, she noticed something unusual. One of the casks near the back corner wasn't labeled like the others. Instead of the clear, official markings that indicated its contents and batch number, it bore a faint, handwritten scrawl she couldn't quite make out. She crouched down to examine it more closely. An old batch? She murmured to herself, running her fingers along the faded writing. The text was smudged, but after a moment, she could just make out a date, nearly 15 years old. What's this doing here? Lynn wasn't one to shy away from curiosity, especially when it came to her craft. She found a nearby tool and carefully pried open the cask's lid, her heart fluttering with anticipation. Inside, the liquor was darker than expected, its rich amber hue almost glowing in the faint light. She dipped a finger into the liquid and tasted it, her brows furrowing as the complex flavor washed over her tongue. It was extraordinary, smooth, deep, and layered, with notes of honeyed oak and spiced orange that lingered long after she swallowed. This wasn't just any forgotten batch, it was special. Something crafted with incredible skill and patience. Lynn stood there for a moment, lost in thought. Who had made this? And why had it been tucked away and left to age so quietly? Before she could ponder further, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Startled, Lynn turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. It was Joe Hang, his presence as commanding as ever even in the soft morning light. Curiosity got the better of you? He asked, his tone more amused than reprimanding. Lynn's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of embarrassment creeping into her voice. I thought it was another batch for today's testing. I didn't expect to find this. Joe stepped closer, his sharp gaze landing on the open cask. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, just enough for Lynn to notice. It wasn't surprise, exactly, but recognition. He knew something about this batch. It's not on the production schedule, Lynn said carefully. Why is it here? For a moment, Joe said nothing. He simply stared at the cask, his hand resting lightly on the edge as though he were weighing what to say next. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. This is a private reserve. Something my father commissioned years ago. Your father? Lynn's brows knitted together. She had heard whispers about Joe Hang's father, a man known in the industry for his ambitious ventures and bold decisions. Yet also someone shrouded in a certain level of mystery. Most of what she knew came from company lore rather than official history. Joe's lips quirked into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Before I took over the company, my father ran it differently. He had a habit of pursuing grand ideas, some of which never saw the light of day. This batch was one of them. It was meant to be the cornerstone of a new product line. But before it could launch, things changed. The company faced financial challenges, and the batch was quietly set aside. I suppose it was forgotten, until now. Lynn nodded, her curiosity growing. Did he ever tell you why he thought this batch was so important? Joe hesitated, then gave a small shrug. He always said it represented his vision of the future. Something that would put our distillery on the map in a way no other product had before. But it was never just about profit. For him, this batch was personal, a way of proving that our craft could compete with the finest in the world. Lynn couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration. Then why let it sit here all these years? My father passed away before he could finish what he started, Joe said simply. And when I took over, my focus was on saving the company, not chasing his old dreams. I didn't think there was time for sentimentality. But now? Lynn asked, tilting her head slightly. Joe met her gaze, and for once, his expression was open, unguarded. Now, I think it's time to honor his vision. If this batch is as good as he believed it to be, it deserves a chance to shine. And who better to make it happen than you? Lynn blinked, taken aback. You want me to work on this? But I've never done anything with a reserve this old. And I didn't even know it existed until 5 minutes ago. That's why I trust you, Joe said, his voice firm. You have the skill, the dedication, and the perspective. I've seen the way you approach your craft. You're not afraid to take risks. But you also know when to respect tradition. That balance is exactly what this batch needs. Lynn felt a flicker of excitement, but it was tempered by the weight of the responsibility he was placing on her shoulders. What if I fail? What if it doesn't live up to your father's expectations? Joe stepped closer, his tone softer now. You won't fail, and even if it's not perfect, what matters is that we tried, that we gave it a chance. My father didn't get to see this batch reach its full potential. But maybe, through your work, he can still be a part of what we're building. Lynn looked down at the cask, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought about all the late nights she had spent perfecting her craft. the countless moments of doubt and determination that had brought her here. If this was a chance to honor not only Joe's father's legacy but also her own dedication, how could she say no? "I'll do it," she said finally, lifting her chin to meet Joe's gaze. "I'll give it my best." Joe's faint smile returned, this time tinged with genuine warmth. "I never doubted you would." As he turned to leave, Lynn felt a strange mix of nerves and exhilaration. This wasn't just another project. It was a piece of history. A bridge between past and present. And perhaps a way to create something truly extraordinary. The quiet hum of the distillery filled her ears again, and she knew that the next few weeks would be some of the most challenging and rewarding of her career. Session 9. A night of truth and triumph. The night of the Legacy Blend launch event had finally arrived. Lin Shuinong stood in the bustling hall, the anticipation buzzing in her veins. The venue was elegant, illuminated by soft, golden lights that reflected off the polished surfaces of the room. Around her, industry experts, journalists, and seasoned distillers mingled, their conversations filled with curiosity about the long-awaited unveiling of Jing Distillery's latest creation. Lin's eyes scanned the crowd as she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had worked tirelessly for months to bring the Legacy Blend to life, pouring her heart into perfecting the flavor profile and ensuring the aged liquor honored its original creator. Yet, despite all her effort, doubt still crept in. Would these seasoned palates truly appreciate what she had achieved? Would her hard work pay off? Or would it be dismissed as just another blend? The room quieted as Joe Heng stepped onto the stage. He was every bit the commanding presence Lin had come to know. His tailored suit exuding authority as he addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joe began, his voice smooth and confident. "We're here tonight not just to celebrate a new product, but to honor the craftsmanship and dedication that defines Jing Distillery. Tonight's Legacy Blend is more than a drink. It's a testament to our commitment to excellence, and a tribute to the vision of the master distillers who came before us." The audience erupted into polite applause, and Lin felt a flicker of hope. Joe's words carried weight, and if he believed in the Legacy Blend, perhaps others would too. When it was Lin's turn to speak, she ascended the stage, her legs trembling just slightly. Standing at the microphone, she gazed out at the faces before her and swallowed her nerves. "Good evening," she began, her voice strong despite the tension in her chest. "My name is Lin Shuinong, and I've had the honor of leading the distillation process for the Legacy Blend. This project began as a journey into the past, a rediscovery of a batch that was nearly forgotten. It was our task to not only preserve its character but also to elevate it. We wanted to create something timeless, a spirit that would carry forward the artistry of those who came before us while speaking to a new generation." Lin continued, detailing the meticulous process she and her team had undertaken. From carefully sourcing complementary ingredients to enhance the liquor's depth, to the countless rounds of tasting and adjusting to ensure the perfect balance of flavors. Every step had been deliberate. As she spoke, she noticed heads nodding in the audience. She saw glimmers of interest sparking in the eyes of the guests. She took a step back, allowing the attendees to absorb her words as the waitstaff began circulating with glasses of the Legacy Blend. The air was thick with expectation as each guest took a glass and held it up to the light. Examining the golden hue, Lin could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching each time someone raised their glass to their lips. The first murmurs of approval were soft but unmistakable. Across the room, an older gentleman with a silver beard took a sip and nodded, a smile spreading across his face. A woman in a sleek black dress tilted her head thoughtfully before leaning over to her colleague and whispering something that made him grin. Slowly, more and more guests began to react positively, some nodding, others exchanging excited whispers. Lin felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Behind her, Joe Heng stepped up, holding his own glass of the Legacy Blend. "This," he said, his voice carrying just enough for her to hear, "is exactly what we hoped for." Lin turned to face him, her brow furrowed. "You think so?" Joe nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Trust me, they're impressed. You've done something remarkable." Lin, her heart swelled at his words, but she remained cautious. "It's not over until the reviews are in." He shrugged slightly, his calm demeanor both reassuring and infuriating. "True, but sometimes, you just know. And tonight, I know this is a success. As the night wore on, the energy in the room shifted from polite interest to genuine enthusiasm. Guests returned for second tastes, discussing the subtle complexity of the Legacy Blend's profile. A prominent liquor critic was overheard calling it a new benchmark for the industry. Lynn stayed close to the sidelines, quietly observing, but her growing confidence was undeniable. She had done it. She had taken a forgotten batch and turned it into something worth celebrating. Later that evening, after the formalities had concluded, Lynn found herself alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The distant hum of traffic and the glittering skyline offered a brief moment of quiet reflection. She stared at the glass in her hand, the golden liquid catching the light, and thought about everything it represented. This wasn't just a drink. It was the culmination of months of effort, risk, and belief in something greater than herself. Joe joined her, leaning on the railing a few feet away. He didn't speak at first, simply holding his own glass and watching the view. You were right, Lynn finally said, her voice soft. It feels good to see people appreciate it. Joe turned his head, studying her profile. You had no reason to doubt. The work speaks for itself. Lynn hesitated. Sometimes I think the hardest part is letting myself believe it's good enough. That I'm good enough. He took a step closer, his tone gentle but firm. You are. You've proven that tonight. For a moment, Lynn let herself feel the pride that had been building all evening. She took a sip from her glass, savoring the rich, smooth flavor. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead. More blends to create, more expectations to meet. But tonight, she could pause and let the moment sink in. To the Legacy Blend, she said, raising her glass toward Joe. He raised his own, his eyes steady and warm. To the Legacy Blend, and to the distiller who made it happen. As their glasses clinked, Lynn felt a surge of quiet confidence. She had taken her first major step toward building her own legacy. And tonight, it was clear, she was on the right path. Lingering doubt, would this triumph last? Would the Legacy Blend truly earn its place among the greats? Joe joined her, holding 2 glasses of the blend. One for you, he said, handing her a glass. To celebrate, Lynn took the glass, swirling the liquid thoughtfully. It still feels surreal, like I've only just begun to understand what this all means. That's because you're not done, Joe replied. A legacy isn't built in a single night. But tonight is a step forward. A moment to remember. And it's yours. Lynn looked at him, his sharp features softened in the golden glow of the cityscape. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, the challenges, the arguments, the late nights in the distillery. And she realized that as much as she had worried about proving herself to the world, she had already proven something far more important, that she was capable of taking a vision and bringing it to life. That she could honor the past while shaping the future. To the next step, she said, raising her glass. Joe clinked his glass against hers, a faint smile curving his lips. To the next step. Session 10. A legacy secured. The weeks following the successful launch of the Legacy Blend were a whirlwind for Lin Shuinong. Orders were pouring in faster than Jing Distillery could fill them. Critics continued to praise the blend, calling it a triumph that revitalized the company's reputation. For the first time since joining Jing, Lin felt an undeniable sense of pride, not just in her work, but in herself. She had created something that mattered, something that would stand the test of time. Yet, despite the external success, Lin found herself restless. The feeling would creep up late at night as she lay in bed or in the quiet moments after a long day at the distillery. It wasn't just the stress of managing demand or the pressure of maintaining her newfound reputation. It was something deeper, an unanswered question. A path she wasn't sure she wanted to follow. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Lin found herself in her father's small, cluttered workshop. The smell of aging oak barrels and faint traces of alcohol hung in the air, bringing back memories of when she was a child, watching her father work with quiet focus. Now, he stood beside her, his hands calloused from decades of craftsmanship, gently tapping the side of a barrel to check its integrity. "You've done good, Shuinong," he said after a long pause, his voice steady. "Your mother would be proud." Lin looked down at the smooth wood grain beneath her fingertips. "I hope so. She trailed off, unsure how to put her feelings into words. Her father's knowing gaze met hers. "You feel like there's something missing?" Lin nodded. "I thought the success would feel different. I thought once the legacy blend was out there and people loved it, I'd be settled, but it's like I'm still waiting for something. Like I'm not quite there yet. Her father leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. Maybe it's not about the blend. Maybe it's about where you want to go next. Lynn considered his words. She had spent so much time focused on perfecting the legacy blend that she hadn't given much thought to what came after. The pressure of expectations, both her own and those of others, weighed heavily on her. Maybe, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father reached out, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Whatever it is, you'll figure it out, and whatever you decide, I'll support you. A week later, Lynn was back at the distillery. Standing in the cavernous main room, rows of barrels lined the walls, the scent of aged liquor rich in the air. She was alone, the echo of her footsteps the only sound. In her hands, she held a notebook filled with her own notes, ideas for new blends, experimental methods, and sketches of innovative barrel designs. For years, she had jotted these ideas down, never thinking she would have the chance to bring them to life. But now, after the legacy blend's success, she had the resources and the credibility to pursue her vision. All she needed was the courage to take that next step. Lynn opened the notebook to a page she had marked months ago. It detailed a concept for a new type of blend, one that incorporated unexpected ingredients and pushed the boundaries of traditional distilling. She had been hesitant to show it to anyone, worried it would be dismissed as too experimental or impractical. But as she stood there, the excitement of the challenge began to outweigh her fear of failure. Just as she was lost in thought, Joe Hang appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first, simply observing her from a distance. When she noticed him, she quickly closed the notebook and tucked it under her arm. "Caught you scheming," Joe said, a faint smirk on his lips. Lynn crossed her arms. "I wasn't scheming, just thinking." "Big difference," he replied, stepping closer. "What about?" She hesitated. Over the past few months, their relationship had grown less contentious, more understanding. Joe had given her space to lead, to make decisions, and to shine in her own right. Still, she wasn't sure how he would react to what she was about to say. "About what's next," she admitted. "I have ideas for new blends. Ideas that might seem out there." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Out there how?" Lynn opened the notebook, flipping to the page she had been looking at. She handed it to him without a word. Joe scanned the notes, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, there was a glint of intrigue in his eyes. "This is ambitious," he said. "I know. Ambitious is good." Lynn blinked, surprised. "You think so?" "I do," Joe said, handing the notebook back to her. "You've proven you know what you're doing. Why stop now?" Lynn's lips curved into a small smile. "You really mean that?" Joe's expression softened. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." The weight on Lynn's shoulders seemed a little lighter. She had expected resistance, doubt, maybe even dismissal. Instead, Joe had given her the push she needed. Over the next several weeks, Lynn threw herself into her new project. She experimented with ingredients she had never used before, collaborated with experts in unrelated fields, and took calculated risks that would have terrified her a year ago. Some attempts failed spectacularly, but others showed promise, enough to keep her moving forward. As her project gained momentum, so did her confidence. She no longer felt like an outsider in the industry, someone struggling to prove herself. She was a distiller with a vision, one who wasn't afraid to break the mold. And for the first time, she felt truly at home in her work. The day she unveiled her next creation, the room was filled with a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Critics who had praised the legacy blend were back, along with new faces eager to see what Lynn would do next. This time, she stood at the podium with steady hands, her voice clear and confident as she introduced the blend. "This isn't just a product," Lynn said, her gaze sweeping the audience. "It's a reflection of everything I've learned, everything I've pushed myself to achieve. It's about honoring tradition while embracing innovation. It's about daring to do something different." When the first glasses were poured, Lynn held her breath. The first sip was taken, then another, and another. This time, the applause came faster, louder, and with more conviction. Lynn's new blend wasn't just good, it was groundbreaking. As she stood there, the applause washing over her, she glanced toward the back of the room. Joe Hang was there, his arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. He gave her a small nod. And in that moment, Lin knew she had truly arrived. Her legacy was secure. A love that lasts. Lin Shuinong stood outside the distillery. The evening breeze carrying the faint scent of oak barrels and wildflowers. In her hands was a bottle of the legacy blend. The culmination of years of dedication, failure, and triumph. Behind her, the lights of the distillery glowed warm and steady. A comforting beacon that reminded her how far she had come. Over the past year, everything had changed, her career, her relationships, her sense of self. She had proven that she was not just a skilled distiller, but a true innovator, someone capable of taking bold risks and turning them into success. More importantly, she had learned that she didn't have to go it alone. Zhou Heng had shown her that trust and partnership weren't signs of weakness, but strengths that could help her achieve more than she ever thought possible. Lin smiled as she recalled how far they'd both come. Zhou's initial brusque demeanor had softened over time. She had seen his humanity, the quiet vulnerability he hid behind his relentless drive. And Zhou had come to appreciate Lin's stubborn independence, understanding that her fierce determination was what made her a great distiller and a great partner. Their relationship had been far from simple. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but through it all, they had found a way to respect each other's differences and support each other's ambitions. Together, they had turned Jing Distillery into a symbol of both tradition and innovation. They had created something that would stand the test of time. As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Lin took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of peace. She had finally found her place, not just in her work, but in her life. She wasn't the same person she had been when Zhou first walked into the distillery. She was stronger, more confident, and more open to the possibilities the future might hold. Zhou stepped out of the distillery, his sharp suit replaced by a more relaxed jacket and shirt. His gaze found hers, and a faint smile curved his lips. "Still admiring your handiwork?" he teased, nodding toward the bottle in her hands. Lin shrugged, a playful glint in her eyes. "Just making sure it lives up to the hype." He chuckled, coming to stand beside her. If it didn't, they wouldn't be lining up around the block to get a bottle. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the stars as the cool air settled around them. After a moment, Zhou turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter now. "When I first took this job, I thought I'd be the one making all the decisions, the one leading the charge. But you," he paused, as if searching for the right words. "You showed me that the best decisions come from collaboration, from trusting someone who sees things differently." Lin looked at him, her chest tightening slightly. She had never heard him speak so candidly. "And you," she replied softly, "taught me that it's okay to lean on someone else, that you don't have to carry the weight of everything alone." They stood there for a while, the gentle sounds of the distillery fading into the background. In that moment, Lin realized that their journey wasn't just about revitalizing the distillery or creating a legacy blend. It was about the unexpected, often challenging, and ultimately beautiful process of building something together, something that mattered, something that would last. Zhou reached out, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned to face him fully, the bottle still cradled in one hand. The glow from the distillery lights reflected in his eyes, warm and steady, just like the man she had come to know. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. Lin nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "And we still have a long way to go." "Good," he said with a faint smirk. "I'm not done challenging you yet." Lin laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "That makes two of us." As they stood there under the stars, it was clear that this was only the beginning. The work, the challenges, the victories, they would keep coming. But now, they knew they could face them together. And that was more than enough. With a final glance at the distillery that had brought them together, Lin turned to Zhou, her smile full of quiet determination. "Let's keep building," she said. And together, they did. Thank you for watching today's CEO Love Stories. Every love story is a journey, one filled with passion, ambition, sacrifice, and unforgettable moments. Here at CEO Love Stories, we bring you the most compelling tales where power, success, and love collide. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Can love overcome power and ambition? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next breathtaking romance. CEO Love Stories. Where love and power collide. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. See you in the next story.